Hope everyone can hear me. Maybe someone can let me know in the chat box if you can. Thanks, Yeshua. In the interest of being respectful of everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Stephen Carter. I'm the business and parking manager for the Department of Transportation. Want to thank the people that are logged in today and are taking an interest in downtown parking. As you probably know, we have been working since last fall, really, with the consulting firm Kimley-Horn on a downtown parking plan, where really we're just taking a look at all aspects of our operations. And they've spent many months already working on this project and are ready to share some information and maybe get some feedback from folks. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Yeshua Pringle, who's been the project manager from the Kimley-Horn side, excuse me, the Kimley-Horn side of this project. So Yeshua, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you for joining. My name is Yeshua Pringle. I am here from Kimley-Horn, and I will go ahead and give you a quick presentation, and then looking forward to getting your feedback and some questions at the end. I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Yeshua, before you get started, I forgot to say, if anyone has questions, feel free to just put those in the chat. We're trying to limit actual number of speakers, but at the end of the meeting or throughout, if we're able to address those questions in the chat, we will do so. And also, if you didn't see the notification, this meeting is also being recorded. So just wanted to let everyone know that. Thanks.
So the downtown parking study came about looking at ways to respond to changing parking demand in downtown Greensboro. After the pandemic, we saw a decrease in office parking demand, and then an increase in the way the on-street parking system was operating. And we really wanted to determine ways to balance out the system and make sure that the system was being used efficiently. The goal of the Greensboro Parking Plan is fourfold. The first is to improve legibility. So to make sure that people understand how to identify public parking facilities, how to get to those public parking facilities, and then just navigate them easily. The next is to increase equity. And we know that parking is a shared resource, but in downtown Greensboro, there's the challenge of having a lot of the publicly available parking in the north end rather than having parking in the south end. So looking at ways to address that is a part of this project. We also wanted to enhance effectiveness to make sure that we're providing an outstanding and safe parking experience for customers, and then addressing their concerns and making sure that we're operating in industry best practices. Lastly, we wanted to ensure sustainability, and we wanted to make sure that we're looking at ways to ensure long-term environmental and financial sustainability as we make investments into our parking system. There are 7 key objectives across 4 categories. Our first objective was first and foremost safety, and we want to ensure a safe on-street and off-street parking system. But not just making sure that it's safe, we want to make sure that it feels safe, so that when customers are coming to a public facility, they feel welcomed and they know that they can park their car there and be okay. The next is under operations, and we want to modernize and standardize parking operations to make sure that the system is being used efficiently. Next, activation. Connecting parking to the wider mobility system so that people can park once and then get around downtown Greensboro with ease. Also, we want to make sure that our parking facilities are activation hubs that have ground level retail and then add to the overall experience in Greensboro. Lastly, under redevelopment, we want to create a financially sustainable approach that supports downtown redevelopment, and then determine ways to make strategic investments in our existing and future parking infrastructure. We did an existing conditions assessment, and one of the first big takeaways we saw from our existing conditions was that 36% of the land in downtown Greensboro is used to provide parking, and that includes surface parking lots as well as structured parking decks. So that's a huge amount of land that's being dedicated to parking rather than other uses like housing or businesses. In downtown Greensboro, the city manages approximately 4,500 off-street parking spaces. And when we say off-street parking, that is specifically looking at parking lots and parking decks. The city manages these 4,500 spaces across 5 decks and 7 surface lots. And there's currently a parking deck that's under construction that will add another 720 spaces to the parking system. We looked at how the parking was utilized at city parking facilities, and we saw that the parking occupancy was about 15 to 50% on a typical day. So that means that around 2,500 spaces are available to support future development. We're just seeing that the off-street parking facilities that are managed by the city are not being used to their highest capacity. When it comes to on-street parking, this is everything that's going on at the curb. The city manages about 1,900 on-street parking spaces, and that's split across 490 metered spaces, 610 time-limited spaces, so spaces that have a time limit but are free to park there, 772 unrestricted spaces. Those are spaces that are not time-limited and not metered, and then 29 ADA spaces. So as you can see here, the amount of free spaces in downtown Greensboro is about 70% of that, which is the majority of the parking in the system for on-street. One thing we also noticed is that the way these parking locations are determined, whether it's metered or not metered, isn't based on parking demand, and that hasn't been a historical approach to it. So we did want to take a look into how the spaces are being used to determine the impact of parking demand. We evaluated parking demand in the month of March on a typical Thursday, Saturday, and Tuesday, and we looked at it across 4 times in a given day. What we saw is that Saturday afternoons was the time of the highest parking demand at 72% with occupancy system-wide. We also saw that the highest observed demand was on Elm Street, and that was at 96%. As you can see in this graph, there is a lot of areas that are in red, and those are the areas that have the highest parking occupancy. When we look at the occupancy for a given block face, so on one side of the street between 2 intersections, we saw that about 60% of the block faces in downtown were more than 85% full. And 85% is that magic number where if you're at 85% or higher, typically see parking as being full, and then people will start to drive around, cruise for parking so that they can find something available. That increases congestion, increases emissions, and just takes away from the overall parking experience. Also, we noticed that parking demand stays high in the evenings on Saturdays as well as throughout the week. So there's not a drop off of parking demand in the evenings after the system stops being managed by the city. Some takeaways from our existing conditions assessment is that downtown has an excessive amount of paid parking. There's a lot of land that's being used for parking. And then the city-owned facilities currently are being underutilized. Redeveloping surface lots can spur economic growth and downtown vibrancy. So looking at ways to convert those surface lots to higher and better uses is an essential part to improving the Greensboro parking system. For off-street parking, we found that the majority of the on-street parking system is unpaid, and that Saturdays have the highest demand, and that's when parking is free and unmanaged. Also, that the system is currently overloaded for on-street parking, and that causes decreased efficiency in that system. So we really need to find ways to balance the demand between on-street and off-street parking. We then conducted a benchmark study looking at 5 cities that were peer or aspirational cities. And aspirational cities are cities that we wanted to look into to learn better ways to manage parking and improve the overall system. So in this study, we looked at Boise, Idaho, Columbus, Ohio, Greenville, South Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. When we compared the hours of operation currently in Greensboro to other cities, we noticed that for Greensboro, the hours of operation for off-street parking facilities begins at 12 a.m. and then goes to 6 p.m. Then there's a gap, and that gap then resumes where you start paying for parking again at 9 p.m. and then it goes until 12 a.m. When compared to other cities, we see that there's not a gap in the system. Actually, 4 out of 5 of the cities that we benchmarked operate their off-street parking facilities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Even the one city that didn't operate 24/7 didn't have any gaps in the times where they were managing parking. So we noticed that that's an anomaly unique to Greensboro that we should look into. Additionally, we looked at the hourly rate for off-street parking, and we saw that in the city of Greensboro, the first hour is free, and then each subsequent hour costs $1 to park. After 9 p.m., there's a $2 overnight flat rate. But what we saw was that 5 out of the 5 cities that we benchmarked have higher hourly rates than Greensboro. And then 4 out of the 5 have a maximum daily rate that's higher than Greensboro. So Greensboro's price for parking is lower than the market value that we're seeing in other cities. We looked at on-street parking hours of operation. Currently, Greensboro manages on-street parking from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. And we saw that 3 out of the 5 cities operate their parking systems after 6 p.m., typically going to around 8 p.m. And that's in order to manage the first turn of that dining experience in the evenings. We also noticed some policies or innovative programming that we'd want to take a look at. In Boise, Idaho, they have a unique approach to providing a prepaid option for Saturdays. So you're allowed to purchase your parking on Friday nights for Saturdays in case you're out and enjoying yourself a little too much and need to take an Uber home. You can prepay for your parking for the next day, and you can avoid having a citation. That increases the safety on our roadways and then definitely helps to have a better downtown experience. They also provide secure bike parking through a downtown program called Bike Boy. In Columbus, Ohio, they provide area-specific plans within their downtown area because it's understandable that we don't want to take a one-size-fits-all approach to managing parking. So they look at the uniqueness of each area and determine ways to make sure we're adjusting the system to meet the needs of users. In Greenville, South Carolina, they offer a discounted parking pass for hospitality employees to make sure that they're able to park if they're in the evenings and weekends, and they're lowering the burden of pricing for those type of employees. In Raleigh, North Carolina, they're dedicating pickup zones at the curb to make sure that we're having an efficient on-street and off-street loading system. And then they also allow small businesses to buy temporary permits to add for that loading and unloading to help relieve that. And lastly, in Savannah, Georgia, they've connected transit to their parking system by offering the free downtown transit service and bike share at parking facilities so that people are able to connect to a broader mobility system. We then looked at industry best practices, and we saw 5 industry best practices for off-street parking. The first is create a quality parking experience. The next, limiting parking expansions, and this is done by removing parking minimums, setting parking maximums, and then encouraging the use of shared parking across different facilities so that we're getting the most out of the existing parking that we have. The next is identifying ways to use parking efficiently by offering different permit types, things like offering a daily parking permit or looking at pooled parking so that a tenant is able to purchase their parking. And if they exceed a maximum threshold, they then are charged an hourly rate, giving a customer flexibility with their parking needs. Promoting multimodal travel is extremely important, and that's connecting parking to the broader mobility system, looking at ways to leverage transit, bike share, and other modes of travel so that people can park once and then access the rest of downtown in a seamless manner. And lastly, cities are looking into ways to support EV fleet conversion and the growing EV charging demand, determining the scale of EV charging that's needed in the system, and then how ready or capable or installed the EV system needs to be in order to meet customer demand. For on-street parking, we saw that there are 5 industry-leading practices. The first is setting curb priorities based on the surrounding land uses. In curb environments, they really need to serve the businesses and the adjacent land uses, so making sure that we're scaling the practices that we're serving those land uses. The next is diversifying the curb lane with non-parking uses. So things like adding parklets, bike parking, things that are not related to automobiles at the curb is extremely important to add to the vibrancy of downtown. There's also a practice of shifting from parking enforcement to curb lane compliance. And this focuses on creating an ambassador approach to parking so that people feel welcome. And the people who are monitoring the curb also are able to serve as agents where they can tell people about different dining locations, special events, or other attractions in the downtown area, really serving as ambassadors for our downtown. When it comes to exploring strategies that enhance curb lane efficiency, cities are looking at ways to price the curb lane dynamically so that we're able to get additional turnover and availability, making sure that people have access to the curb for a limited amount of time. And then once they're done with accessing the curb, they're able to create availability so someone else has a chance to access the curb as well, and using pricing as a strategy to encourage people to incentivize turnover. And then lastly, incorporating smart loading zones and monetizing loading zone access. So looking at ways that we can add technology to loading zones so that delivery companies can pay for access to the curb, understand where curb lane is available for loading and unloading, and then making sure that we're also getting turnover there to increase the efficiency of it and minimize double parking. We launched a survey to get feedback from stakeholders and citizens. And we had, for our general parking survey, we had 968 responses to the survey. When we asked participants, what's their location of primary residence, 14% said that they live in the downtown area, and 62% said that they live in the city of Greensboro. When asked which location they work in, 34% said that they work downtown, and 42% said they live in Greensboro. So when it comes to the responses that we're seeing, this definitely reflects the viewpoints of people who live and work in downtown. When asked the top 5 reasons for visiting downtown, the number 1 reason was dining. The number 2 was entertainment, and the number 3 was special events. These top 3 uses definitely lean towards parking demand in the evenings and on weekends. And it shows that there's a demand for access and for downtown parking during those time frames. The number 4 reason was work, and then the number 5 reason was shopping. We also asked people, where's their preferred parking location? And 50% said that they prefer on-street parking, 40% that said they prefer to park in a city deck or lot, and then the remaining 10% said they park in a private facility or that they don't park downtown. So it definitely shows that there's a huge demand for parking access for on-street parking in city facilities. When we asked citizens how we could improve the on-street parking system, 91% said they wanted to know, they wanted more spaces available. 69% said that they wanted to park for longer time periods. And then 67% said they wanted to know where available parking was. So communicating where parking is and creating parking turnover are essential elements for improving the on-street parking system. When it comes to off-street parking, we saw that 86% of people said that they wanted more spaces available. 80% said they wanted to know the location of available parking spaces. And 67% said that they wanted improved signage. This leans towards making sure that we're educating people about where parking is. As we know, the current public parking system is used at about 15 to 50%. So there are a lot of spaces available, and educating people about that availability is extremely important. Some final takeaways. Dining, again, is the number 1 reason why people are visiting downtown. The number 1 factor in determining the location of parking for on-street is distance to their destination. People want to park close to their destination and have easy access to the curb. For off-street parking, it's the availability of parking spaces. So we need to do a better job at communicating where that availability is. When asked, when is the highest demand for parking? People typically want to park in the evenings from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. So that evening time frame is extremely important to address customer demand. And lastly, when we ask people if it's difficult to find parking after 6 p.m., after the system is not being managed, we saw that 80% of people said that it's difficult to find parking on street, and 51% of people said that it's difficult finding parking off street. So balancing parking demand between the on-street and off-street parking systems in the evening is an essential part of moving forward. We looked into areas of opportunity and improvement, and we identified 5 big moves. The first big move is to enhance the parking experience. The next is to support a park once experience. The third is to manage the curb lanes and roadways based on demand. Fourth, we want to leverage city-owned parking facilities. And then fifth, we want to make sure that we develop a redevelopment strategy focused on parking assets. So when it comes to enhancing the parking experience, we want to make sure that people are able to identify where parking is easily. And that goes to signage. Whether it's on the actual physical parking facility with a big blue P that signifies public parking, or our digital footprint, making sure that people are aware of their parking options. It's extremely important to communicate where parking is located. The next is to seek opportunities for street level activation and enhance the vibrancy around parking facilities. We need to make sure that as people are traveling from parking decks to their destination, it feels safe, it feels vibrant, and we're creating more opportunity for people to walk and access different businesses by parking in public facilities. After that, we want to update technology, lighting, and security to make sure that we're enhancing safety at all of these off-street parking facilities, making sure that not only are they safe, but they actually feel safe is an essential part of moving forward. And lastly, for enhancing the parking experience, we need to expand parking hours of operation for off-street parking facilities to a 24/7 approach so that we're aligning with industry best practices. To support a park once experience, we need to strengthen our offering of micro-mobility options, making sure that we have both bike share and scooters available in the downtown area and connected to public parking facilities so people can park their car and then access the rest of downtown in a seamless way. We also need to leverage the future trolley service that's coming to enhance connectivity between the facilities that are in the northern portion of downtown and the south end. Making sure that we're addressing that is really going to help relieve some of the parking demand that we're experiencing in our south end. Next, we want to focus on pedestrian activation along corridors adjacent to public parking facilities. Again, making sure that we take a strategic look at where the parking starts and where the destinations are, and enhancing that walkability. It'll be extremely important. And lastly, we want to integrate parking with multimodal offerings throughout downtown so that we're leveraging transit. We're providing information on when transit is available, and people are able to seamlessly transition from one mode to the next. When it comes to managing the curb lanes and roadways based on demand, we want to shift from roadways that are predominantly on-street parking and travel lanes to curb lanes that have a variety of uses and are able to serve multiple user groups. So first, we want to evaluate demand at the curb and determine user priorities at each curb location to identify opportunities to address parking demand. Next, we want to focus on reallocation of curb space so that we're able to support loading zone access and generate turnover. If we have a more efficient curb lane, then that'll give us more opportunities to reallocate curb space to other uses. Third, we want to create a comprehensive curb management strategy and allocate portions of the curb to non-parking uses, making sure that we're expanding things like our outdoor dining systems, putting in bike parking or scooter corrals. Those are all aspects that help to create a more vibrant area and improve multimodal travel. And then lastly, we want to develop management strategies based on demand and extend paid hours of operation for on-street parking to the evenings and weekend and Saturdays to make sure that we're generating that turnover and managing the system efficiently when demand is at its highest. To leverage city-owned parking facilities, we want to use city-owned surface lots as a catalyst for infill development and transient-oriented developments. So looking at some of the locations of city-owned property and determining ways that we can develop that to get the highest and best use out of the land. We also want to encourage people to use on-street parking for their short-term parking needs and off-street parking for their long-term parking needs. So if you're parking for 2 or more hours, you know that the place for you is an off-street parking facility. But if you need quick access to the curb, those spaces are available so you can park, handle your business, and then leave, opening that space up for someone else. We also want to develop stronger protocols to coordinate with the private sector to determine where when the city invests in additional off-street parking, and also making sure that the private sector knows that there is parking available in city parking lots so that they're able to meet their needs by using city public facilities. After that, we want to coordinate with event venues to make sure that people have a connection with their event going and with the city's available off-street parking. Looking at ways to encourage people to purchase their parking as a part of pre-booking when they're buying their access to their event pass will help to enhance the overall experience for event goers. And lastly, we want to offer incentives to the private sector to redevelop surface lots so that we're getting more out of our land, encouraging people to use the public off-street parking facilities, and then getting the highest and best use out of our downtown. And a last approach of redevelopment strategies focused on parking assets. We want to engage the development community to get feedback on their redevelopment needs and look at what's coming down the pike to determine how we can best serve that and lower any barriers for development. We need to conduct an evaluation to determine the appropriate land uses and densities that can create a more livable and walkable downtown. And lastly, we want to integrate public transportation into the city's parking inventory to further encourage a park once mentality. That'll free up even more land for development and make sure we're getting a very thriving and greater Greensboro. And with that, we'll go into any questions. We're not seeing any questions in the chat. If you can, I see Taylor's trying to unmute.
It's not allowed.
You're off mute.
Yes, I was just curious if you would be addressing any specific locations or if this was just a more high level, I guess, discussion at this point.
So specific locations for redevelopment?
Well, for the parking in general, like if y'all had a larger plan for parking areas to redevelop or repurpose those.
So we are going to be looking at all of the city parking facilities to evaluate improvements and specific strategies per facility. So as far as the specific locations, that's something that we'll end up digging into with the city. We are looking at each location individually and then looking at the system as a whole. When it comes to redevelopment, there are certain city-owned lots that we could look into. One example is the Depot Complex. And as we're talking with the city, that would be a great location to look into developing a transit-oriented development. So looking at ways to coordinate with the development community to convert that surface lot to a transit-oriented development is definitely something that we want to pursue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? So we'll definitely be looking into developing some quick wins with the city. We do expect the city to start making changes within the next 12 months, looking at ways to just enhance the experience at the off-street parking facilities when it comes to a timeline. We'll also be developing this for both short-term, midterm, and long-term changes that will be going for the next 2 to 5 years. So it's definitely something where it will be building up over time and you'll start to see changes in the system. As far as specific action items, we're currently working with the city to determine a timeline of critical pathways, first focusing on safety aspects and then enhancing the customer experience so that people are encouraged to use off-street parking facilities before we start making changes to the system overall.
What are the next steps for the city?
So after these public meetings, we'll be really digging into some number crunching. We're going to look at different management strategies and determine what's the cost of certain improvements and how do we create the financial feasibility for that. Additionally, we're going to be looking at different ways to start to engage with the private sector, looking at ways to, again, determine what the feasibility is for potential redevelopment as we're improving the overall parking experience. So the next steps is really just digging into all the numbers, digging into more data and developing different scenarios to determine what the best path for the city is moving forward. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Not hearing any or seeing any, rather. Okay. We really thank everyone for joining in today. Thank you for the questions, and all of this information will be posted on the city's website, so you'll be able to see both this recording as well as the supporting materials thus far. And then we'll make sure to follow up with everyone when we get to the end of the plan to get some additional feedback on action items and the approach moving forward. Stephen, I want to see if you have any closing remarks.
I was just gonna say, if we can send you a direct email with a link to the source documents that sort of where this presentation came from today, if you'd like to just leave your email in the chat. If you'd rather not do that, again, hopefully either before this week is out or early next week, we will have there should be a page that can be linked either from the main city webpage or the Department of Transportation webpage, where we'll post the documents and the presentation.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks.